thing is, the knowledge of Prophet is of two kinds. The knowledge of the laws and knowledge of the wisdom and secrets. The scholar cannot be called an inheritor if he does not inherit both knowledges. Good, isn't it? Like, so let's say somebody learns all the Sharia laws, theology, and then, but you become knowledgeable in that, but it's not the inheritor that the Prophet, peace be upon him, is talking about. I guess this is what Imam Ghazali felt. He said, I knew all of it, everything about Allah, but I didn't really know Allah. I didn't feel Allah's presence. So that part was missing. And it's only then you get, you become a true alim and a knower of Allah. He also says, quote, every order has its own way of keeping the Sunnah of the Prophet. Our order, through its sheikhs, requires us to keep all the commands of the Prophet and to leave all the things he prohibited. Our sheikhs do not follow easy ways. This is rukhsa. You know, rukhsa means sometimes you get life to make it easy practicing Islam. You allow certain things because they don't follow these, but insist on keeping the difficult ways. In all their seeking, they keep in mind the verse of the Quran which says, men whom neither business nor trade will divert from the remembrance of Allah. But obviously, you know, we don't want to make religion difficult, but what he's saying is that in your personal practice, you can try to fulfill azama, which is the maximum, most strict. But usually when you're talking to people, you talk about rukhsa or fatwa, or try to make it easier if there is room for that. But he's saying that in terms of following, we don't do that to ourselves. We go to the azama, maximum, with ourselves. Imam, yeah? Yeah, of course. Like, you know, if we go into extreme, religion becomes very hard to do, and the Prophet ﷺ saw that. And we shouldn't forget that he's talking to everybody, and the common Muslims, maybe to us even. Yeah, let me explain. Like, for example, Abdullah ibn Omar, he says one day, just to him only, Abdullah is a great person, Muslim, but if he only prayed the night tahajjud prayer, he wasn't practicing that. The Prophet ﷺ, like, he never, or he didn't usually go to the khutbah and say everyone should pray tahajjud prayer. He even said, for example, if I did not think that miswak, brushing the teeth, was going to be hard, I would have commanded everybody to do it. He thought, well, it would have been too hard to do, therefore he left it optional. So from what we see is that sometimes to individuals he can recommend, you know, a bit more higher standards, but when he was talking to a general, it was going to be a bit more middle path. Those examples you're talking about, that was 3 Sahaba, for example. One of them said, I'm not going to sleep with my wife. The other said, I'm going to fast every day. The other one said, I'm going to wake up every night, I won't sleep. And so that became common knowledge with people. And the prophets, people rumored around that. And then the Prophet ﷺ called them and said, is this what you guys said? Yes. He said, look, I'm married. Sometimes I fast, sometimes I don't. I sleep at night, and so I also pray. Because this is my example. If you don't follow us, you're not one of us. Imam Rabbani, actually, he says that out of all the things in my journey, I saw Sunnah had the greatest light. Even smallest of sunnah had the greatest light. So sunnah is great. There's another example of Abdullah ibn Abbas where he says, he comes to the Prophet, peace be upon him, he says, Ya Rasulullah, I want to fast more, I can do more. He said, what can I do? He said, well, fast beginning, middle and end of the month, because I can do more than that. So then Monday, Thursdays, I can do more than that. Then he said, do the fasting of Dawood, Prophet David. He said, one day on, one day off. And Abdullah says, I can do more than that. He goes, that's it, there's no more than that. Now, obviously this is still pretty extreme, like fasting one day on, one day off. And that's the practice of a prophet. So the Prophet ﷺ allowed him to do that. But you know what, Sahaba, when it came to practicing religion, when they said they're going to practice something, they did it for the rest of their lives. So Abdullah ibn Abbas did practice one day on, one day off for years, and he was like a young person in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, so he lived for a long time after that. And towards the end of his life, he said, I should have listened to Prophet, because it became hard when in old age to fast one day on, one day off. But even though he said that, I think he's done a great job fasting all his life like that. So I guess the key thing here is that when you give a fatwa, you know, the Prophet ﷺ was giving fatwa or setting the standard. You think about what most people can practice within the interpretive boundaries of the religion. Obviously, you cannot say, just to make it easy, reduce 5 daily prayers to 3 or 2. You know, you can't do that. So it's only when there's room of interpretation. However, in your personal practice, you can go to the extreme as much as the Prophet did. Like for us, extreme is what Prophet ﷺ practiced. Beyond that is the real extreme. And when you really, if you try to follow the Prophet's example, it's very hard, really, if you think about it. For example, tahajjud every night. How many people can do that? Actually, Imam Rabbani has this explanation of Sunnah in his 7 levels of Sunnah. Let's go through that. You would think to yourself, well, how many levels could there be? But once again, in his explanation, there's spiritual considerations as well. I don't know, does that answer your question? Okay. Okay, he says, this is Imam Rabbani's 7 levels of Sunnah. He goes, first, number 1, outwardly follow the Prophet's example without inner transformation. So basically imitating the Prophet's behaviors, what he said and what he did, outwardly, without much change inside. Because this is the first level. Obviously, you start with that, but that's not acceptable. Because the second one is that, second level of Sunnah is acting in accordance with Prophet's sayings and actions so that the inner self is involved as well. So in this way, the character is refined. So there's a refinement of character by the practice of Sunnah. So you practice it outwardly, but there's inner reflection of trying to fix yourself as well, in terms of behaviors and character. So that's the second level, according to... Third level, according to Imam Rabbani's characterization of Sunnah, is emulate the states and experiences of those who are close to Allah, close to God. The heart becomes tranquil and free themselves from rebellion. At this point, one's imitation of the Prophet is a genuine performance. You know, sometimes when we're practicing, let's say, salat, you do it, but you really don't want to do it. Inside your nafs just doesn't want to do it. You're forcing yourself. That's what the rebellion he's talking about. Because at the third level, there would no longer be rebellion. there would be tranquility in one's heart, so there would be full submission to Sunnah, or the practice of Sunnah. And so there's a genuine practice. So the fourth level of Sunnah is a real imitation of the Prophet based on a thorough understanding and appreciation of Islam. And the Quran and the Prophet like a well-grounded scholar. And this is the ulama al-Rashidun, as the Quran says. Like trying to practice Sunnah in an atomized way. When you say, here's a hadith, the Prophet used to wash his hands, okay, I'll wash my hands. He used to eat with his right hand, I'll eat with my right hand. This is an atomized practice of Sunnah. And it's got a inner reflection of it, and then a genuine wanting to do it. That was the third level. So the fourth level is, you grow a full understanding of Islam in its whole sense, and you do Sunnah or practice of religion according to that, with that knowledge. And this is extremely important, you know. And this is what distinguishes really between how we respond to things in our lives. There's a prophetic response that comes with it. Like for example, somebody does like I know that when you understand Islam as a religion that builds things, it's constructive, you never think about behaving destructively, do you? You wouldn't, no matter what happens. Imam Rabbani, like he was persecuted, put in jail. He never wrote to his thousands of followers, rebel against the Shah, overthrow him, release me, you know, establish justice. He never said that, because he understood that that would be destructive. And this only happens when you fully appreciate Islam in a way that you would be able to interpret cloudy situations properly. And that is Sunnah as well, or practice of Sunnah. So that's number 4. The fifth level of Sunnah, according to Imam Rabbani, is imitating the perfection of the Prophet, not acquired but as a favor of God. This is the special domain of great prophets' examples. You know, ulul azm prophets, he called it. So once again, at this level, it's actually imitating the Prophet's perfections, his kamalat, which is the refinement or further refinement of his character, and showing the utmost behaviors because it becomes your quality or competence. You know, for example, once this man, he comes to Prophet ﷺ, grabs him by the collar from behind, where the collar leaves a mark on his neck. Give me my money, give me my money. And the Prophet ﷺ turns around and smiles. What would you do? You know? See, that smile is a reflection of Prophet's kamalat. He has no other way of behaving. Like, it just comes naturally to him like that. Actually, Omar is next to him. He says, Ya Rasulullah, let me chop this infidel's head off. He says, Omar, just wait. You should tell your friend that he should ask for his money nicely. Like, he's also giving a lesson as well there. So, like, this is... so, what Imam Rabbani is saying is that when you reach the fifth level of Sunnah, where the behaviors and the perfection of the Prophet, peace be upon him, become your own character, your own competence. And also, it's almost like a unconscious competence. You know, usually the competencies come in different ways. Sometimes there's 4 levels. The first one is what's called unconscious incompetence. You're bad at something, or you're behaving really badly, but you don't even know about it. So the second level to that is conscience incompetence. So you're behaving badly and you're aware of it. And that's the only way you can change yourself. And the third level is conscience competence. So you do the right thing consciously. In a way you force yourself. It still hasn't become second nature. And the final fourth level is unconscious competence. That you behave the right way without even realizing it, without even thinking about it. So that's the fifth level, and according to Imam Rabbani, this is the level of ulul azm prophets. Or if a person gets to that level of sunnah, that he's emulating the Rasuls, including the Prophet ﷺ. And who are the ulul azm prophets? Nuh alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, Jesus alayhi salam, and the Prophet, peace be upon him. Okay, that's the fifth one. There's two more to go. The sixth level of sunnah, according to Imam Rabbani, is imitating the Prophet in his special station of belovedness, mahbubiyyah. The grace of perfections depend on love only. So the kamalat, your good behaviors and good attributes, is a reflection of love rather than anything else. And therefore you are loved. So when you come into a room, you behave, you speak, people just love you for no other reason that you display those perfections. The seventh level is that this is the level of, he says, Imam Rabbani, he makes the point first, because up to now, the 6 levels were ascension. You're ascending in your character or higher level of practice of sunnah, because the 7th level is the descent. And it covers all 6 levels. So you can return back to people. But in this level, a special type of resemblance is created between the follower and the one who is followed. So there is a resemblance created between a follower and the followed. And who's the followed? The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So the one who follows becomes like the Prophet as a person, even to a point where he says, Imam Rabbani says, the distinction between the two is blurred. So basically, you see an embodiment of sunnah before you, when a person practices that, or it just reminds you of the Prophet ﷺ. Like Sheikh Salih was saying about a scholar, because because I've been an imam for 20 years, and I always, you always recite certain hadith and explain it. One of them is, whenever you see a backbiting done about a person in a gathering, leave the gathering. So this is a hadith. Because I've been teaching this, but I've never understood it until I saw this scholar, when somebody tried to speak about another person, he just left, got up and left. And sorry, he said it was me, because I was talking about a person in a little bit of a, I thought, critical manner that probably could have equated to gossip, backbiting, because he got up and left. Because I felt like a boiling water was, went over his shoulders. And he goes, I really understood the meaning of that hadith. See, that one was an example of that, wasn't it? But the behavior reminded of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is the 7 levels of sunnah according to Imam Rabbani. It's very high levels. I think if we can do at least first 4 or 5, we can have a... And obviously he makes the point that not everyone can get to the 7th level. Only a few people have ever achieved it. Maybe he was one of them. And actually before the, when he reaches the age of 63, he goes, you know, talk about following the Sunnah. The Prophet, peace be upon him, died at the age of 63. He goes, well, it's time for me to go. And he actually predicted his death. And on one, he says, on one day, after, when I was reflecting after the morning prayer, he realized that his robe, his usual robe that he wears in the mornings, was not his but someone else's. And he interprets that to mean that his time is up. And he actually turns over the leadership of the movement to the next person, and he goes into seclusion for 7 months, and after that he passes away. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala treat him with mercy and enable him to do a shafa for us in the afterlife, inshallah. Okay, well, if I just maybe finish off with saying, I mentioned the in maintaining integrity of Islam in subcontinent. That was a very important legacy of Ahmed Sirhindi or Imam Rabbani. And he also introduces this mujaddidi line. And his activism and revivalism is what we call mujaddidi. Now, what's a mujaddid? Well, it's based on a hadith narrated by Abu Dawud. And Abu Dawud narrated, lineage goes back to Abu Hurairah, where the Prophet, peace be upon him, says, after me there will no longer be a prophet. Allah will send a renewer of this faith every 100 years, or beginning of every 100 years. So this hadith is considered sahih by scholars, actually, because the people on the chain are all famous people. So actually a lot of people came. So Imam Rabbani is known as mujaddid al-Fithani, the mujaddid, the renewer of the second millennia. Now, how do we know a mujaddid? Or what does the mujaddid do? A mujaddid's job is to deal with one of the most significant problems that has an impact on the entire Muslim world. And it needs a solution, and the mujaddid actually provides that solution. But usually what happens is that people don't realize it at the time always. Maybe his close circle and followers and realize the significance, but it takes time for the impact to be felt across the entire Muslim world, maybe a couple of centuries. Then you say, that he was a mujaddid. And what mujaddid does is that in solving that problem, which is challenging the entire Muslim world, he rephrases the teachings and fundamentals of Islam in a new language, but self-evidently Quranic and Islamic. That when people read it, you would say, we all knew that. But the thing is, nobody said it that way until he did. It's like Imam Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin. When you read it, you say, okay, that's Islam. That's how we knew Islam. But it was very new for his time. Or the way he expression is new, not the principles. And also in doing so, mujaddid actually clears all the wrong interpretations. Maybe some legacy interpretations that were solutions for one time are no longer solutions, and they're hindering the Muslim world. And also the way Muslims are able to relate to Islam or relate Islam to themselves in that given time and place. And that can actually take Islam forward into the future. Like, don't we feel that at the moment that we're stuck somewhere? Right? We are not able to surpass that, and Islam has so much potential for humanity, for us individuals. But you need something, right? So this is what mujaddids do. They take Islam and Muslims forward into address the problems of that time and then take them forward into the future. So in that sense, Imam Rabbani was a mujaddid of his time. His teachings saved Islam in India, but also through the Naqshbandi order, they spread across the Muslim world. Like for example, not many people know, but there is another mujaddid, Mawlana Khalid Baghdadi. Remember this name, we might touch on it next week as well. Mawlana Khalid Baghdadi died in 1827. And he's called Baghdadi because he used to go to Baghdad a lot. But he's really from the northern Iraq, Kurdish regions. But he actually goes to India to study. And only after that, he's influenced by the mujaddid line of Imam Rabbani, and he comes back and preaches a Sunnah-based Sufism, which was very important to combat towards Wahhabi influences of that time. Because that's when Wahhabism was kind of started new as well. And he was very influential in the Ottoman Empire, even North Africa, India. This is Mawlana Khalid Baghdadi. So through successive sheikhs, scholars and influences, Imam Rabbani's, not only his form of tasawwuf, Sufism, became the kind of the norm in the Naqshbandi type, but also his revivalist, not with violence but with patience, and also with teaching. Spirituality is his hallmark, and that takes us to the next person, which we'll talk about next week, is Sayyid Nursi, because he did exactly the same in 20th century. Okay, we'll inshallah stop there. I think that's enough. 1.5 hours. I hope I didn't bore you. Unless if you have questions, I'm happy to answer. Yes?
I think you mentioned it before as well.
Just one moment.
Assalamu alaikum. As probably it was mentioned as well, but I'm just asking again this question that other than Maktubat, which was in 3 volumes as you mentioned, was there any other book attributed to Imam Rabbani or under his direction by his students at that time?
He has a book on refutation of Shiism, but that was written before he became the leader of a movement. He really doesn't. He hasn't written. I mean, it hasn't survived to us, and even his letters were compiled by his students. He didn't write. He dictated, but it was compiled into a volume by his students. With his knowledge, obviously he knew about that. And they're very scholarly when you read it. Sometimes he goes into deep topics, sometimes into theology. Sometimes he's just a form of advice. For example, he writes to a Sayyid, a descendant of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He says, don't think because you're a descendant of the Prophet that you'll be saved. Be with the men of God. Meaning, like, hang around with people who are righteous, religious, otherwise you'll lose it as well. And that's really nice. Like, he had that boldness of giving that advice. But it's true advice, isn't it? Like, no, who has guarantees? Just because you're a descendant of the Prophet doesn't take you automatically into paradise. Even the Prophet himself said, Fatima, Fatima, the same thing. So he spent like most of his life into activism. This is why sometimes these type of scholars their real influence is not in what's written, in what they do and how they really transform individuals, and through that transform society. They've got this powerful presence, and you just like I gave that example, You know, you stay in their presence for 10 minutes and it will transform you. It's kind of amazing. Like there aren't many people like that, unfortunately, around the world. But there is some, fortunately. Okay.
Just have a subjective question. Well, you mentioned that there are mujaddids every 100 years, and obviously we haven't ended, like, judgment that hasn't come, so there's probably more to come. So I was wondering what you think is our most sort of dire need at the moment. So what do you think the next mujaddid will focus on, or should focus on?
Okay, well, preempting next week's discussion, because Sayyid Nursi is also known as the mujaddid of 20th century by his followers and also by others as well, acknowledged. But sometimes when others acknowledge him as mujaddid, they say there could be more than one mujaddid at a given time. It just happens to be one of them. In his time, the biggest problem was how to deal with the challenge of science and philosophy. So that's why he wrote on those matters, theological matters. In our time, the biggest issue is Muslims dealing with conflict and how to reflect Islam in society in a correct way. But at the moment, we are sort of we're going from two extremes of secularism on one hand, and then theocracy on another hand. Like people want to come establish Islamic State and then impose Islam from the top. That never works. We're going to learn hard way, unfortunately, in some countries. And there's plenty of examples in the past. Akbar is a great example. He tried to impose a particular interpretation from politics. It backfired. And so, like, you can't do that from politics. And on the other hand, we cannot also accept a purely secular society. In that, religion is completely absent. So how do you make Islam relevant for Muslims and the world in a way that's acceptable to Muslims and non-Muslims? This is the big challenge. And whichever scholar does this is the mujaddid of our time. And once again, you're not going to know the full impact until they come and go, perhaps.
So if the focus is politics, and obviously the best way...
It's not politics, it's society. I said society, not politics.
Okay, but in a way it's sort of like how societies are governed or maintained. So should we be expecting like a political leader or no? Or do you think it's always going to be the divide between the scholarly line and the political?
Mujaddid, the only political mujaddid is recognized as Omar bin Abdulaziz. He's the only one out of the list, although some say that Yavuz Sultan Selim was a mujaddid as well, kind of, you know, how he takes the Khilafah, but that's not very convincing. I mean, Omar bin Abdulaziz was great. He's universally acknowledged. He actually reverses a lot of bad policies in his 3 years of short time. But the thing is, he lives like a scholar. He lives like this Khulafa Rashidun. So you gotta get, it's very rare to get people like that. Nuruddin was one as well, almost to a point where they call them Wali Sultan or Wali President. We gotta say Wali President. They have to be so spiritual that, I mean, it would be very powerful if somebody was to come in that way. Like they represent Islam in such a way, but they never impose it. They should never impose it. Just their presence should be enough, and through their policies, they have to solve problems rather than create new problems. Again, like when you look at the world now, what's the biggest issue? Non-Muslims are fearful of Islam. They're thinking that Muslims will come and create these theocratic societies where they're going to force us to become Muslim or live under, or we're not going to be free to live as we want to. Or that the terrorists will come and, you know, blow up bombs. And I just had one experience. I was questioning in front of a non-Muslim audience the laws that are being introduced. A 14-year-old youth could be detained under this new proposed laws. I was saying, look, this is not good. What does a 14-year-old person do? And a grown-up sane people are saying, if it's going to make me safe, I don't care. This is what they say. There's so much hatred out there, you wouldn't believe, against Muslims and Islam. On the other hand, Muslims, it's not entirely non-Muslims' fault, because there are crazy Muslims who have no qualms about doing wrong things and thinking that they are practicing Islam. So we have this big, massive issue. Like the mujaddid has to reconcile all of these things. And it's never one person, by the way. I don't think in this day and age it cannot be just one person. Maybe you could have a leading scholar, and then it's got to be a movement behind it, behind the scholar as well. You can't just write about it. You have to practice it. People have to believe in these solutions and implement it, teach it to others. Just like Imam Rabbani had thousands of murids and followers and khalifas. Or the term khalifa in Sufism is like somebody who can represent the sheikh and who's also able to accept students. But they can only become the sheikh once the sheikh passes away. I don't know if that answers your question. And it's usually what people will think that it's, okay, their scholar is the mujaddid. But it's gotta be a global impact, and it's gotta be a impact on solve the problem for the entire Muslim world. But because the scale is so big, like change never happens immediately. It takes time. But when you look back later, like 50 years later or something, or 100 years later, you say, hey, it was that scholar who influenced everybody, and thankfully, because of him, we were able to come to this level, this stage. And then they're acknowledged as the mujaddid. Yeah?
Okay. I just wanted to ask one issue which is particularly attached with Sufism in that part of the world, subcontinent. I'm not sure if it was there at the time of Imam as well, is how Sufism is interpreted in terms of people going to shrines and some people worshipping at the shrines. So it's less so with tasawwuf and more on that sort of aspect. I just wanted to know if Imam had a particular take on that, and how did he encounter those sorts of practices during his time, if there were any.
Yeah, they were beginning to come out, and when something becomes mass movement, and sophisticated ideas go to the level of ordinary followers, they can sometimes be really misunderstood. Like for example, I know that once this lady who has a primary school education in Sydney, she was saying to me, there's this idea that we can, as human beings, if we practice religion, develop spiritually, you can reach levels above angels sometimes. Because angels' spiritual levels are fixed, but ours is not. This idea is a kind of a sophisticated idea. It actually is based on Surah Tin. God created human beings in the best patterns and reduced them to the lowest of the low, except those who believe in the good deeds. That gives us a spectrum of variability of human beings. But this lady was saying, did you know that we are higher than angels? And she was thankfully, well, it doesn't mean you're automatically higher than angels. You have to get there. See, they miss all that nuances because it comes down to the ordinary level. The Sufism or Tasawwuf has very sophisticated spiritual concepts and ideas, because it's based on really, it's a long tradition of major figures describing these states, spiritual states, that can be reproduced. Like there's this pattern when you reach spiritual levels that are recognizable. And it's not just one person, it's different people can do similar things and get to the same point, which then proves that they are real and they describe these things. But they are very sophisticated. Once you bring it down to the ordinary, they can misunderstand all of that. And one of those is wasila, for example. Wasila this actually is also based on Sunnah, where when one Sahaba comes to Prophet, peace be upon him, says, "Oh Prophet, teach me a dua, a prayer that would give me abundance and I could become, I'm poor, I can be well off." And the Prophet ﷺ teaches in a dua where he's mentioned, like, for the sake of your Prophet Muhammad, he teaches that. And then there's also wasila of 3 people who hide in a rock in a thunderstorm and the rock falls before the cave's mouth. They can't get out, so they make a very exceptionally good deed as a wasila, or a reason, or a vehicle, an instrument of prayer to approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So wasila is acceptable, and Imam Rabbani says this, and others as well. It's acceptable when you say, "Oh Allah," you're still praying to God, you're praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you just mention the name for the sake of so-and-so, your Prophet, your companions, or this Abdul Qadir Jilani, Shaykh Naqshbandi, forgive me. Or you're not praying to them, but you're making them an instrument of your prayer, or vehicle. This is acceptable according to theology, but try to teach this to an ordinary person who's got no training. And sometimes there's 2 aspects to this. One is that those who are critical of this, like the Salafi movement, you go to a tomb of a famous sheikh or a saint, and you open your hands, you're praying to Allah, you're making wasila, you're making for the sake of this person, or maybe you may be just reading Fatiha to the soul of the dead, and they interpret that as praying to the dead person, but it's not. They're not praying. So there's an outward appearance that we should not be fooled by that. Then there is the aspect of somebody who's misunderstanding that and actually praying to the dead person. I don't know if anybody does that, to be honest, but it can happen in India because of the Hindu mixing of those things. People tend to go to these tombs more than the mosques sometimes. And then there's the third level where some pre-Islamic or non-Islamic practices of visiting a dead person are done by Muslims. Like, for example, they're tying these cloth into a tree next to the tomb of a person, or to the fence of a dead person, or putting a stone touching in the walls, thinking that something's going to happen. Like, these are all superstitious things people do. I mean, I'm a rational person, for spiritual things you've got to prove it to me before I can accept it. What I did once was, when I was visited Turkey, there's a famous Hajj Bayram Veli in Ankara, and that gets a lot of visitors. And I said, okay, I'm going to visit this tomb. And but sometimes when you're saying, oh, I'm going to visit a saint, there's a placebo effect. Placebo effect is when you're given a medicine thinking that a tablet, you think it's a medicine, but it's a sugar tablet. And you say, oh, I'm going to take a brand new, newly discovered medicine. And you actually get better by that expectation. That's called placebo effect. So sometimes in these spiritual things, there's a placebo effect as well. When you think, okay, you're going to go in there and meet this fantastic place of a fantastic saint. So what I did was, I had no expectation. I'll just assume that this is a dead person, a grave. And also deliberately I emptied out all my thoughts as I was entering. Like, I'm not thinking about anything. I was even trying to think about weather and so on. I'm just testing what's going to happen, what am I going to feel when I go in there. No expectation, empty your thoughts, like all of that, or just go into like any usual place. Believe me, as soon as I walked in, this spiritual energy hit me. Like, you just feel it straight away into your heart expanding. Like, there's something there, like there's that you can't deny. It could be rahmah of Allah, it could be sakina that the hadith talks about. I don't know what. And I just recited Fatiha, sat in a corner and contemplated death. Like, these things can really affect you. And sometimes these kind of tombs, there's another one in Istanbul. I've seen one of this grave, an ancient old grave, in the middle of the road. This street passing by. They say that the bulldozers could not demolish the grave, so they had to pass around it. I don't know whether that's true or not. Again, you have to prove it to me. But why would they leave it in the middle of the road otherwise? Yeah. So there are things to be criticized about in Sufism, but we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater and dismiss all of tasawwuf. There's also two aspects to tasawwuf. One is, or Sufism, in English we say just Sufism, but in Arabic it's tasawwuf and tariqah. Tariqah is the orders, like the institutions, or spiritual tasawwuf institutions. But tasawwuf is the science of spirituality. And as Imam Rabbani himself said, Sharia is made up of the knowledge, the practice, and also the inner intention. You can't avoid that. Or as the Prophet, peace be upon him, defined ihsan, to worship Allah even if as if you're seeing Allah, even if you don't see Him, He sees you. And how do you get to that level? Well, you've got to go through some spiritual training and practice and initiation and teaching. You've got to see that from somebody. Like, certain things you can't just learn from the books. This is why those who follow the tasawwuf line, they say there is the Quran, there's the Sunnah as it's practiced by the hadith books. But there's also Sunnah that's transmitted from the Prophet ﷺ to Sahaba, from Sahaba to scholars after them. And so from people to people, the Sunnah as it's lived and practiced is also transmitted. You only see it in the embodiment of that person's behavior, like Imam Rabbani explained in his 7 levels of Sunnah. And I think all of these things are very important, and this is what we're lacking in our time. People just try to follow the Islam or Sharia to the letter, but the spirit is not there. Or you don't see there's an inconsistency between very high level of religious practice, which we call religiosity, and there's a poor behavior that comes out from that person. Whereas when you look at the Prophet ﷺ, it's a whole, isn't it? Like, he does practice, but he's also extremely well behaved and highly spiritual person. So that's the Sunnah. Like, if we have to be like a human being like the Prophet ﷺ. We have to be a believer like the Prophet ﷺ. We have to be a Muslim like the Prophet ﷺ. And ultimately that's the Sunnah. As Imam Rabbani said, we cannot atomize Sunnah too much. or fragmented into bits of behaviors. There's a totality of it as well. And ultimately the Prophet ﷺ said, I came to complete the character, isn't it? Akhlaq. We desperately need that. Maybe that's another duty of the mujaddid, to establish the real Sunnah. Thank you. Next week we're going to do Sayyid Nursi. He was born 1876, died in 1960, lived through the end of Ottoman Empire, beginning of the modern era, in a pivotal time. His story is very interesting as well. Inshallah, see you next week.